Hello, you've tuned in to the supply side with your host, Tony Paquin. That's me. We're here to unravel the medical supply chain's twists and turns, one episode at a time. Together with industry insiders and healthcare professionals, we'll dig deep, ask tough questions, and maybe, just maybe, find some answers. So let's get started. But first, don't forget to press the subscribe button. Today, I'm excited to have a very good friend, a fascinating individual, somebody that's accomplished great things in his life, Obie McKenzie, and he and I are going to talk a little bit about his experience in the world, and also I know some work that he's been doing recently in this area of medical supply chain. So, Obie, welcome. Please say hello.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much, Tony, for having me. Always good to sit down and have a chat with you. I've learned a lot from you, and I expect to continue to learn more. And given the significance of supply chain for national security, I'm very interested in talking to you more about that.
Absolutely. Well, Obie, first off, I've always just had great respect and admiration for you. I know that we've got a couple of things in common. One is our love for God, and the other is our love for the Jamaican women that control our lives. So
Indeed. Indeed.
we have a lot of great things in common.
So true.
But I love you and I've had a lot of great conversations about both those subjects, as well as healthcare and medical supply. But I just love that. And Obie, I got to tell you, in my life, and I think probably in yours too. I think the unique thing about you and me is we've been around a long time. We've seen a lot of stuff, man.
Just been around the block a couple of minutes. Look.
Yeah.
I can't believe it, but my 79th birthday's coming up in November.
Shocking.
Age is a number. It's a number. It's not an attitude. So I don't feel like that, but I've been around. I've seen a few rodeos.
Yeah, well, first off, you look fantastic. You sound great. You're sharper than ever. If I'm looking like you at 79, it'll be a miracle. Let me just say, I'll be thrilled. The reason I bring that up is because, and you and I have talked about this many times. I talk about a little bit in the book that I'm working on, but we have lived through some things. We're in a little bit of this little kind of recession, inflationary period right now, but you and we've worked our way through probably 4 or 5 of those cycles.
Yeah. I've seen this rodeo before. It's a little different rodeo, and it gets a little more difficult as more dollars are being printed. Everybody doesn't understand that the printing of money is in fact inflation.
Yeah, exactly.
And people are feeling very anxious, and they don't really quite understand what's going on. But as we print more money and we spend more than we have, that is in fact inflation. I bumped into a senior guy at BlackRock where I was for a long time, and he ran fixed income. And I said, well, isn't dollar debasement the antithesis of price inflation? He looked at me and says, shh, be quiet. Don't say it.
Nobody's supposed to know that.
Nobody.
Well, it's like we print money with just reckless abandon. There's just no limit. We don't even give it a thought.
We don't give it a thought. It's we keep printing, and people understand that the dollars we carry is really debt. It's not equity.
Yeah.
If they take a look at the top of the dollar bill, it says Federal Reserve note. So somebody's due some interest.
That's right. That's a loan. That's what it is. And somebody's got to pay it back. And we've been talking about this. Now, that's been a subject for 20 years, 30 years, but my goodness, it's just never been anything like it is now. It's incredible. And by the way, it used to be a left-right thing. Like there's a Democrat and a Republican side of this story, but it's really both sides of the aisle today.
Every administration prints money, and they have to do it at the end of every month to pay our bills. So the Treasury bills, Treasury bonds, Treasury notes are all designed to pay our bills. And we print them up, people buy them, and they expect to get paid back. But as the financial strength of our government is reduced, the risk of not being paid back is rising. So our
Hmm.
credit worthiness. I mean, I tell people all the time, the only difference between us and Greece is that we can print dollars and they can't print euros.
That's about it. Well, and we have a history that we used to be, worth the dollars. I mean,
Yeah,
it's yeah. You look at things like, oh, this can go on forever. Well, China's starting to develop a global currency. You
yeah,
know,
yeah,
and there's even a discussion about our credit worthiness. I mean, you never even had that discussion 30 years ago,
exactly.
right? So
Yeah,
the world is changing. It's a different place. Before we get into that too much, though, I got to go back for everybody's benefit because I truly, in all sincerity, think you're an amazing guy. You've had an amazing career, and
thank you.
I like to get things in context a little bit because you put your age out there. I didn't want to ask, but you've got it out there. So, so
I'm great.
you were born in like 44, right? Is
That's
that
right.
kind
That's
of
right.
yeah?
Right.
So kind
Brentwood
of
Conference.
towards the end of World War II.
Yeah,
Yeah. And
that's when the Bretton Woods Conference took place, and we became the currency of the world.
yeah.
That's what happened at the Bretton Woods.
And then you came up through, where were you raised? What part of the country?
I was born in Tennessee, to a working class family. We were sharecroppers in West Tennessee.
Hmm.
And for many black families, we couldn't really make a living picking cotton and working for somebody else for $3 100 pounds of cotton. So we all had to migrate to the north to get jobs. And my family stopped. My mother and father stopped in Indianapolis, and the rest of my family went on to Detroit to get jobs in the automobile factory,
Hmm. Yep,
where they
exactly.
worked until they retired and are all gone. But our story was pretty much the same as many black families from the South. But I grew up with two backgrounds. I grew up in Indianapolis, Indiana, where I went to grade school and high school, and but during the summers I would go back to the South. So I had two
Oh,
orientations.
no kidding. So
Yeah.
you relived the South life. 'Cause now you're talking the South in would have been what, 1955, the late
Yes.
50s into the 60s. It's a different South than it
Yes.
is today. I mean, even all the problems we have today, it was nothing like it was in
It,
1960.
it was it was
Yeah.
pretty. It was a very challenging environment.
Hmm.
Jim Crow,
Why did you go back south in the summer?
because my grandmothers were there, and it would give my
Hmm.
parents a break. So we go,
Get the kids out of here.
yeah, get
Yeah.
the kids out. So we go back south, and I go back to school there because my friends would all still be in school because they get out in the fall for cotton picking. Okay, so
Oh, no
that's
kidding.
the way that system works. So I'd go back to school. It's the only way I'd be able to flirt with the little girls is if I went back to school. So I
That's where they were.
that's what I do. Yeah.
Now, how
So
many siblings did you have?
I have two brothers and a sister.
Okay. Are
I
you
have
the oldest or?
I'm the oldest.
Okay.
I had to carry the banner for making sure that I was a credit to the race and the family and to set an
Yeah.
example for my brothers and sisters. So they all
Yeah.
followed me through school, through Shortridge High School, and then on to Tennessee State University. So they all
Interesting.
graduated, I'm happy to say. And so, yes, I'm the oldest and still trying to set the stage.
Yeah, I think it's amazing, though, credit a little bit to your family and to your parents in that environment, but pushing you all the way into that academic achievement, right? I mean, that was
Yes.
rough.
My,
And it was, I can't imagine your mother went to college, right? You know what I
no,
mean? So,
neither my
yeah,
mother nor my dad.
yeah,
But it was a badge of honor for me to be able to tell them and to bring them my report card, my academic achievements. My dad was working as a janitor, and my mother was putting telephones together at Western Electric, where I had my summer jobs. And
wow.
so I made sure that I'll never forget a man talking to my dad as he was swinging a mop. And he said something to my dad. My dad just said, "Well, where's your son?" And that was during the time I had gotten into Harvard Business School, and I loved making him proud. That was
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
really did, because he was kind of going to school vicarious with me. My father was a very bright man.
That's the thing about these guys. My dad never went to college,
Yeah,
but he's one of the smartest men I ever knew.
yeah.
And isn't it something? Here you got the black man janitor, and people look at him and think, he's nothing. Actually, he's super smart
He's
guy
super
who
smart.
got his kids all the way up to Harvard, right?
He gave me lessons that I still live on. He was the one that said, once a job is first begun, never quit until it's done. Whether a task be great or small, do it well or not at all. Uh, he was the one that said, "Gather ye rosebuds while you may, old time is swiftly flying. For a flower that blooms today, all too soon will be dying." I have all of those recordings in my head from
Wow.
washing his car after church on Sunday. He would teach me things across the top of the car as he was squirting me with the hose.
Well, it obviously worked because you had a reasonably decent career. Yeah, of
Yeah,
course, I'm being facetious with that, but let's walk through that a little bit because it gets into you really have a first class not only education but experience, right,
yes.
with the work that you did. So you did undergrad and then you ended up at Harvard,
I
right?
went to undergraduate school at an HBCU, a historically black college and university, Tennessee State University, which, by the way, I'm on the board there now. I went back to be this is my second term as a trustee of the board of Tennessee State University, and I graduated from there and got a job at Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. I was a college recruiter back in those days, and I recruited engineering students, civil, mechanical, and electrical engineering students at some of the major colleges to go into a management training program at Bethlehem Steel. I had been probably the second African American in that management training program. It's called the Loop program. And that was because they kind of looped you through a number of different departments to get a feel for how the company worked. But my responsibility as a person in the human resources department there, they called it personnel back in those days, was to go out as a college recruiter and interview these young people and convince them that Bethlehem Steel was a great place to work.
Hmm.
And so I did that, and I met a gentleman by the name of Jack Jordan, who asked me really what I was doing, what I wanted to be, and how I was going to develop my career from there. And he had graduated from Harvard Business School, and so
Hmm.
he said, I think you're smart enough to go to Harvard Business School." And I said, "Who, me?" And he said, "Yeah, you." So he helped me with some of my writing that I had to do to qualify,
Yeah.
but I could handle it. And so I got into Harvard Business School in 1970, and I fell in love with finance. And so I wasn't a quant, but I was a good conceptual person. And so
Hmm.
when I studied accounting, I said, what is this balance sheet supposed to be telling me? And when I studied cost accounting, I'd say, what is the cost accounting? What's cost accounting supposed to tell me? And then I work back to the numbers. You know, a professor would be on the board saying that leverage is D over P plus G. I listened to him for a while and I said, wait, I think he's talking about a credit card. So,
You know what happens with people like me when we hear people like you? We think, God, how was I so screwed up at age 25? How did Obie have all that figured out at age 26? I don't understand that. I was a mess. I thought I was doing pretty good, but wow, I think it's incredible.
I had a
That you
good
got
time
through that.
there. It was
Yeah,
a very challenging environment.
was that a couple of year program or how did that
It
play
was
out?
2 years to an MBA in finance. And during that period, it was the 70s, uh, a lot of the graduates were going off to work for the major consulting firms, McKenzie and Company.
Mm-hmm.
First Boston. It wasn't first Boston. It was Boston Consulting Group, and those were the big names. Arthur Andersen was still in business at the time, and it was a big
Mm-hmm.
big consulting practice, going off to really help companies become more efficient. And so I, like many of my other graduates, wanted to get a job in a consulting firm. And between my first and second year at Harvard Business School, that was a big time to get your career started, was to get an internship at a major company. And I had gotten a job at Arthur Andersen between my first and second year. And as fortune would have it, at the same time I was interviewing with the vice president of finance at the Ford Foundation with a gentleman by the name of Roger Kennedy. And Roger Kennedy said, "Look, I kind of would like to hire you to come in here and manage a search process for investment managers to manage $50 million pieces of our capital." And that's how I got into the institutional asset management business. I became known as that kid up at Ford Foundation with $50 million chunks of money to pass around to asset managers. And I did that between my first and second year at Harvard Business School. And that was my first introduction
Mm.
to institutional asset management, which is where I spent a great deal of my career.
That was working out of Boston, or where were you at that
No, I
time?
was in New York at the
Oh, so you're in
At
New
the
York.
Ford
Yeah.
Foundation.
Yeah.
And then I went on back to Boston to complete my MBA.
Mm-hmm.
And when I got out of there, I accepted a job in the corporate finance department of Morgan Stanley. And so I
Mm-hmm.
was a corporate finance associate, where I spent my time really helping underwriting major corporate raises of capital, be it debt or equity. Got into dividend policy and advisory to major corporations. But I was a young associate at Morgan Stanley. Not that it really matters much, but I was the second African American hired by Morgan Stanley in the corporate finance department in the history of
Yeah.
the firm.
That's
And
amazing.
so,
Yeah.
yeah, so they didn't. There were no African Americans in the business at the time. And
Yeah.
so that's where I cut my eye teeth in the financial world, was at Morgan Stanley. Um, Between Morgan Stanley and I took off after Morgan Stanley and tried to become an entrepreneur. I'd always go into a large organization and then out to try to be independent. And so I went out and I joined a firm called Parkmobile, which had investment tax credits for the structure of big parking structures that used a very small space and really operated kind of like a Ferris wheel. So
Mm-hmm.
I sold those, to people who needed an investment tax credit, and so it was a benefit to an investor who invested in a Parkmobile because they reduced their capital expenditure by writing off the ITC, very much the way they're doing now with the IRA.
Mm-hmm.
So I did that, and I then ducked back into corporate America again. Um, by the way, I owe a lot to Roger Kennedy because he was the one who taught me the difference between doing business and analyzing business. He said, if you put your MBA over there on the table across the room and let me teach you the difference. It was a very important part of my
Yeah.
development.
Yeah. It's funny because I work with Wall Street, and have for whatever, 20, 30 years. And a lot of those analysts, I say sometimes, you're like the commentator on ESPN. You haven't really played the game.
Never played the
Okay.
game.
Yeah.
There's a
Yeah.
big difference. I tell people all the time. There's a big difference between finance and money. Well, I was at Harvard Business School. I learned a lot about finance and capital
Mm-hmm.
markets and ratio analysis, but I didn't know a whole lot about money. I didn't know how it was made. Okay, I didn't know, that the Federal Reserve Bank, it wasn't federal, it didn't have any reserves, it wasn't a bank.
It's a very confusing thing about the Federal Reserve. Yeah. Well, it's
Yeah.
interesting that that time that you were there, I talk a lot about that time. It's around that 1980 is a really interesting period, and it's the beginning of the globalization movement, really. And,
Yes.
you're talking about the African Americans ended up in Detroit. My dad was, my family was Irish and Italian descent, or Irish and French descent. They're mutts. And they ended up in those factories as well. And, those were really great jobs in many
Yeah.
ways.
Really great.
They paid well. They got unionized. They had good benefits. My dad ended up on the management side, but he had a great career there. But by that early '80s, it began to turn a little bit,
Right.
and we saw Japan come in as suddenly a major player in manufacturing, and the free trade and the global markets opened up, and suddenly there was this discussion about the value of the global
Right.
market and globalization. And that ran crazy for 30 years. And I don't want to skip over the part where you ended up at BlackRock because you had I don't know, where are they, the largest private equity firm in the world, or
Largest institutional asset management firm in the world. I
yeah.
have been blessed to have senior level financial positions at several large multi-billion-dollar institutional asset management firms. My important part of my financial career is I was manager of banking and pensions for the New York Times newspaper, which is
Wow.
essentially an assistant treasurer's job, which was the other side of the institutional asset management business because I managed all the banking relationships with Toronto Dominion and Royal Bank of Canada. So I was the guy at the New York Times that managed the relationship between people that were managing our treasury
Wow.
funds.
When
Yes,
was that? When were you there?
that was in the 80s.
Okay.
So my career has been investment banking, commercial banking, venture capital finance, broker dealing. I was a first sole proprietor, African American sole proprietor broker dealer on Wall Street.
Yeah,
And
that's amazing.
yes,
You actually have a copy of your brochure or something. I remember you
yes,
showed
yes,
it to me. It
yeah,
was amazing. And there's some great old photos there, by the
yeah.
way.
I had
Yeah,
hair then,
that
Tony.
was Obie with hair. Yeah, I
Oh, you were
remember
there.
that.
Well, my
Yeah,
career has really
but
well.
that's just an amazing thing. I mean, that was an incredible time, an incredible,
It was,
accomplishment. You know,
I was when I was assistant treasurer or manager of banking and pensions. You could buy a guaranteed investment contract for 17%.
wow. That's-
So people are
I,
talking about the level of interest rates today. They
I
ain't seen nothing yet.
No, man, you were talking Jimmy Carter. I always talk with Keisha, my wife. We have a beautiful home in Florida that we happen to get at a really low interest rate on our mortgage. And I said, you got that mortgage in what 1980,
Right?
that mortgage payment would be about 5 times what it is now, or
Today, I'm
more.
telling you.
I,
Yeah.
I don't know what were mortgages going. I mean, you do a mortgage, it'd be what 15%.
15, 16%.
Yeah,
So people are screaming about,
3%,
5%,
4%.
3 or
Yeah.
4%. They haven't seen anything yet. And,
Hmm.
unfortunately, we're gonna see a continuation, in my humble opinion, of a rise in interest rates. And that's just the reality of things. It's as the dollar continues to be challenged by other currencies around the world, and the IMF wants a basket of currencies rather than United States dollar as a prime currency. We're in store for some very interesting times, very much so.
Yeah,
Uh,
as I mentioned earlier, it was unimaginable that the U.S. dollar wouldn't be the petrodollar, and that there'd be these other global currencies. But
yeah,
it's going to
it,
happen. It's
it's going to
happening.
happen. I think that people are not paying attention to the currency wars, but it is a currency war out there, And I think that we're in for some major changes. I think that people's 401ks are going to be challenged. They're being printed, frankly, being printed into oblivion is really what's going on. That people are going to save and go to pick up their capital at a 401k, and it's have been printed into something that doesn't buy as much as it used to buy by a long shot. The dollar has lost 98% of its purchasing power since 1913 when the Federal Reserve Act was passed. And
Interesting.
yeah, 98% of its purchasing power is gone. But I tell people all the time, you don't have to go to Harvard to understand that inflation has been rampant. You know, years ago when my mother sent me to the grocery for milk, bread, and eggs, the bread was like this. It was white. But now you've got a little bitty, a few slices in there. But the dollar amount is the same, so you've really been inflated. So it's kind of a slippery slope that people just don't understand what's going on. The unfortunate thing is that the powers that be leave the people down at the bottom fighting for life because of the disparity in wealth, and they think, well, it's because you did it. Oh, it's because you did it. Well, there's something else going on. The fox created this chicken coop back in 1913 when the Federal Reserve Act was written, and Woodrow Wilson signed the act while Congress was out, but it wasn't federal. They just called it the Federal Reserve Act so they would think it was federal, but it really established the central banking as the way to do things. And the cost of goods sold for the dollar is zero. They've got a printing press there, and you and I have to pay the interest on the notes. But people don't understand that game is all about leverage.
Yeah, and then and politically, it's all about keeping the status quo or keeping those who are in power, right?
Exactly.
And that's just the whole system is designed that way. And
So I don't care whether it's Democrat or Republican. That's what it's designed. That's what it's designed to do.
Yeah, I always tell people we only have one political party. It's called the incumbent. That's the party. And they're going to get reelected this year. That's the way it works. Yeah. So what, of course, as you know, and we'll talk a little bit about healthcare because that's where you and I got connected years ago, talking about this exact subject. But as we went through the globalization move and all this manufacturing went overseas, and it worked really well in many ways. And I tell people it worked well until it didn't. But what we've done, we've arrived at a place where the vast majority of our supplies, probably 90% of our medical supplies, are manufactured somewhere else. In this case, mostly in China.
Yeah.
And that's just not sustainable, right? Pharmaceutical, medical devices, we're really becoming dependent upon this other country that really has it on their sights to be the dominant player in the world on many fronts, right? Currency, military, political. They believe in their system. They think it's the best system, so they're going to go promote that system.
Belongs to us now. When you marry what you just said with the fact that the two biggest holders of U.S. Treasury bills are Japan and China, we are really at a national security risk. What happens when Japan and China stop buying our Treasury bills? Well, obviously interest rates go through the roof.
Right.
We got to find somewhere else to sell those. And so if the demand dries up, then the rate on our Treasury bills has to go up, and every other interest rate follows the Treasury rate, and that has a very deleterious impact on our standard of living, from mortgages to credit cards to everything else.
Right.
So we're really in a very precarious position right now. And I told my nephew when he went to China, I said, well, we're kind of in a war with China. And he said, well, what are you talking about? He was over there for 3 years. I said, well, we started talking about some of these things, and he finally got it. But medical supplies in particular, I think you were the one that taught me that 95% of medical supplies are manufactured there.
Yeah, it's amazing, and they have absolute total control ultimately over our supply chain. It's just remarkable.
Yeah.
And it's extremely dangerous when you add that to the currency power, the military power, the political power. With a moment's notice, they could simply turn the whole system around.
Exactly.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
That is one of the reasons why, U.S. manufactured medical supplies is the way of the future. And as I've called you for some advice, but I've been very much involved with a company that's manufacturing a critical medical supply right here.
Let's talk about that company a little bit, because I think they're a good example of the market. Things are going in the market.
But when you hit a hospital, door to a hospital for any stay, most of the time they're going to hit you with a saline bag or saline flush, and it is salt and water, but for any number of reasons, mostly to check your hydration, etc. They're gonna buy saline from somebody and put it on you to discover what your level of hydration is, or to flush your wound or whatever. But every hospital uses saline bags and saline flushes. So I spend a lot of time now advising companies, one of which is a company called Icicle, which is in Katy, Texas, and is currently building out a manufacturing facility to manufacture saline, saline bags and flushes. And there are three large suppliers of saline, one being Baxter International, another being B. Braun, and another being ICU Medical, are the biggest suppliers of saline. And most hospitals sign a contract for, say, 60 or 70, 80% of their saline from one of the three of those. Well, we're, as we all know, facing some weather irregularities with global warming. And when Puerto Rico had its problems here a couple of years ago, Baxter International had its manufacturing facilities, a good number of them, in Puerto Rico. That totally disrupted the supply chain for saline. And as a result, it remained erratic because of the blow up or the hurricane there in Puerto Rico. So I got affiliated with Icicle because they needed some financial advice to continue raising capital to build out one of four manufacturing facilities that they're going to build. And so in so doing, I saw an opportunity under certain set aside programs to sign a manufacturer's rep agreement with them, so that when their saline comes online, we can market it to those that want to back up their 70% with additional supply. So that 10 to 20% that is not under contract through a GPO would be available for a woman-owned business or a service-disabled veteran-owned business to go after that business. But you've got to have a direct relationship with the manufacturer, which is what we did. I learned a little bit about the supply chain for medical supplies when I sat on the board of Trinity Health New England for about 7 years. And so I really got an opportunity to study the supply chain and understand all the complexity in it. Almost got ourselves in trouble because my wife and I started a medical supply distribution business during the pandemic, or called the Whole Woman Medical Supplies, and we imported some product from China and got out of the business to meet Tony and iRemedy in time to keep ourselves out of trouble because we did not understand all of the fraud and the complexity of the supply chain and moving goods from China. And fortunately for us, we were successful at a couple of trades and got out, with our noses clean, and decided to associate with large organizations like iRemedy,
Yeah.
to keep ourselves out of trouble.
Well, that was a win if you're able to get in and out without major catastrophes. So I'd
Yes.
consider that a good thing. Yeah, the icicle deal, to speak to that a little bit, great guys, a great opportunity. But what it shows you is a simple little, very logical business plan, but still has a lot of challenges to pull off because you've got the GPOs, you got the government, you got the regulatory environment, you got the need for financing, and they're just a small part of a very, very big problem, or they're a small solution to a small part
Right.
of a super big complex problem,
Right.
right? And that is that you've got that legacy world, the established manufacturers, the GPOs, the distributors, the reimbursement system, the finance system. It's hard. They, as one small company, they have quite a trend they're trying to buck.
Absolutely. I think really the thing that their sales strategy is to go after that is not bought under contract with the GPO. And so, given that many of the hospitals that we've talked to anyway are still experiencing some volatility in the supply chain for saline, they want to participate in that 10% that is not under contract.
Right.
And then they also want to collapse the supply chain to where uh, they have a or mini manufacturing operation close to the hospital to collapse the supply chain, reduce the expenses, and thus contribute positively to the EBITDA line of the hospital. And with all hospitals being challenged on the bottom line, then that becomes a solid value proposition.
No doubt. Yeah, we need to come up with cost savings and more reliability in the supply chain for
Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I
Yep.
certainly have learned a lot of that working with you at iRemedy as to how to use technology to collapse the supply chain in a way that is beneficial to the end user so that they can provide more services more cost effectively by reducing the over I say cost overruns, so to speak, in the supply
Yeah.
chain,
Yeah.
unnecessary expenses.
Well, on top of everything else, you have to, overbuy, stock it local, end up throwing away what you don't use,
Right,
right?
right,
And then of course you're buying it all from China and you're sending all the
exactly,
cash there. Yeah.
exactly. Which is
Hmm.
another thing. I mean, given that government is providing some benefits to people that manufacture domestically, is a real catalyst to more U.S. based manufacturing, for us to get some jobs back here, for us to reduce our exposure to Asia, to China. So this is a great opportunity for those that are inclined to be in manufacturing to be manufacturing medical supplies here.
I think that we can compete on the manufacturing front globally.
Yeah.
We have a smart, good workforce, well educated, high technology, great resources. There's no reason for us to hand over all manufacturing to Asia.
No.
Yeah.
And I think we should. That gets into Washington's attitude and its policies that protect U.S. manufacturers of medical supplies from
Hmm.
dumping. I mean, right now, China is dumping all of their nitrile gloves into the country, and it's very difficult, if at all possible, to manufacture nitrile gloves. Your manufacturing costs are their sales price is cheaper than the manufacturing cost.
Yeah. One of the reasons we don't allow monopolies is because you can manipulate markets. if you have monopoly positions. Well, China has that position and they're organized well enough to do it. If they want to manipulate a market, like in nitrile gloves, for example, and we could come up with thousands of illustrations, they have the ability to do that, and they're organized from the top down. I mean, look, the Chinese Communist Party can just put out an edict that that's what they're going to do, and that's what will happen.
What happens? That's what happens. And I think our politicians have got to be smart enough to understand what a risk it is, what a national security risk it is, by them not adjusting policy to protect our constituents.
Yeah. Look, we want the jobs, we need the reliable supply, and we've got to protect our national interests. It only makes sense.
And it's a tremendous opportunity to innovate and to build, new businesses that will capitalize on the problems in the supply chain for medical supplies. It's a tremendous opportunity to innovate, to be more efficient, sustainable entrepreneurs. So I see it as not just a problem, but as a tremendous opportunity to create and to innovate. And when you marry technology with this issue, it's an opportunity.
Yeah, you take an example with Icicle. There's a case of startup company, new idea, but they're great. They're innovating, right? They have some new technology approaches to an old idea.
Right.
That's a perfect example of what we should be doing all day, every day.
Every day.
Right? Mm-hmm.
Icicle, when you have to examine a saline bag, is generally done with the human eye.
Yeah, it's amazing.
And now they're using, and the eyes can only take so much of that. So they have to be on shift for a while and then off. But now they're using, Icicle is using a laser technology that can see particles in there to the most minute size. So not only is the quality of the saline becoming better with the use of technology, but it's also reducing the cost, because you're reducing the human element to examining the saline, which is very progressive, very progressive. So I'm looking forward to there are opportunities in the market for women-owned businesses, for service-disabled, veteran-owned businesses to get a chance to be at the table if, in fact, they're doing business like everybody else. And so I think, speaking of entrepreneurship, my wife and I still have the Whole Woman Medical Supplies. And rather than running all over the place trying to have every medical supply there is, we picked one. And I used the same strategy that I used when I started McKenzie & Company way back when. When I approached Chase investors and asked them to be able to sell some of their asset management services, I picked indexing. Why? Because everybody was indexing. It was the low hanging fruit. Everybody was doing it. It was a volume business, not a margin business. They weren't going to question whether or not I understood replication and stratified sampling. Everybody understands that. In the saline business, every hospital in the world buys saline. So if in fact you can become efficient and cost effective around delivering saline, there's a lot of business there for a small company. So a small amount of business becomes a very large and profitable business if you can financially streamline it, streamline the operation from the PO to delivery. You can do all right. I can wind up on a boat with you and Keisha somewhere in the Caribbean.
Yeah. I'm on board with that idea. Let's do that. So when that product then is Icicle, and that you're going to work that through your partnership with Natalie in the Northeast, or what is the plan there?
Do it in New Jersey and New York. There are more than enough hospitals right here to build a business around it. Last week we met with the New York, New Jersey supplier diversity group here that certifies women-owned businesses.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to make sure I went to the top of the mountain to make sure that we had all the correct certifications, so that when we approached hospitals like Mount Sinai, who has a very strong supplier diversity program, I think it's Northwell has one. Hartford Healthcare has one there in Connecticut, but I do have relationships there. So we're going to really stick to New York and New Jersey.
Mm-hmm.
We don't. It's not necessary for a small company to run all over the place. Just focus on the 50 or so hospitals in your own backyard, who are large multi-hospital systems who want to do business with smaller businesses. And
Mm-hmm.
so our strategy is to focus on one product initially, just stay there and focus on hospitals right here in our own backyard, get inside there and understand the way they do it, follow the rules, and provide them with some saline directly from a U.S. manufacturer where we already have signed a manufacturer's rep agreement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's a great plan. I'm sure it's going to work out very well. They'll be in manufacturing this year.
In first quarter of 2024,
Great.
they'll come online. They're also manufacturing gloves, but I personally don't think that the model for gloves is will be as fruitful as the model for saline.
Yeah, well, the glove market is different for sure. It's more of a generic commodity type product, so it's a little harder. Yeah.
It's harder, and you're racing to the bottom. I mean, Natalie and I had a box of gloves that were manufactured by the same manufacturer in Malaysia that Cardinal and Medline used, and we were price competitive, but we couldn't get around the GPO. And plus, I was on the board at Trinity Health of England, so it was a conflict of interest to me to sell to my own hospitals.
Yeah.
We had designed the box, named the brand Healing Hands. Was the name of our brand. We had the same manufacturer as Cardinal and Medline, but we just couldn't get around the GPO.
Yeah,
And
that's
even with just-in-time purchases, we just couldn't break through. And hospitals got to want to do business with smaller company, and so some of them have gotten very aggressive around wanting to do business with women-owned businesses that they have the same quality of product and the same pricing, and the same delivery and customer service that the large companies do. And I found that if you pick a small enough model, we picked a small model of hospitals here. There's more than enough models right here in hospitals in New Jersey and New York to keep us busy. If we can just open Mount Sinai and do it right, and then do it again, wash, rinse, and repeat, I think it'll be okay.
Yeah, I agree. I think that the diversity angle is that it creates more resilience in the supply chain.
Yeah.
I think everybody learned that lesson a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
We need the government to participate and support in this process. We
Yeah.
need bankers,
Yeah.
financing.
Yeah.
But in the end, it's one of those inevitable things that has to occur. Look, the next global crisis is right around the corner. It's not
Yeah.
like this problem is going away. It's
No,
going to
it's
get,
here.
it's going to get worse before it gets better.
Indeed.
Well, Obie, we're running out of time, but I do want to thank you for taking some time with us today, and appreciate everything that you're doing. Always love spending time with you.
My pleasure. My
So
pleasure.
with that, it's just a wrap up for the Medical Supply Talk. I'm Tony Paquin. It's a pleasure to have spent this time with everybody on the Supply Side Podcast. Don't forget to like, comment, or share it if you enjoy our discussion. Until then, stay curious, stay informed, and let's keep the conversation going. Thanks, Obie.
Absolutely. Thank you,
Thank
Tony.
you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.